Hello, my name is Corey and I would like to welcome you back to the Clater House. I'm very excited to be doing a new type of DIY on my channel, and that is building an upholstered ottoman. The only other furniture piece I've ever built was a very basic bench made of 2x4s when I used to live in an apartment in Colorado, and it was not the cutest, but I'm excited now with some of the new woodworking and DIY skills that I've acquired through doing some pretty big built-ins to see how this one turns out. Speaking of big DIYs, my last video covered a custom built-in library wall made out of Billy Bookcases, and this ottoman is for that same project. So don't forget to subscribe to come back for an upcoming video of the full makeover of that space. But for now, let's make this ottoman. To create the base of my ottoman, I started with a string the length of my radius and traced a circle along my 1/2-inch plywood. With the circle traced, I could then go in and cut it out with my jigsaw. Now this plywood didn't cost us anything. It was plywood that came with the packaging of my flooring that I ordered earlier this year. So this piece, which I luckily had 2 of, was larger than your typical 2-foot by 4-foot project panel. It was like 33¼ or 33½ inches, which was perfect because I wanted this ottoman to be closer to 3 feet rather than 2 feet anyway. With that cut out, I could then lay my first circle on top of my second piece of plywood and trace around it, and then repeat the same process with my jigsaw, cutting all the way around. And then for the rest of my frame, I just took some 2x4s and cut them down to the height that I wanted for my ottoman, minus an inch since both of the plywood pieces were 1/2 inch thick. Now, I did forget to account for the height of my foam, so I had to go back in and cut off like 1 inch to 1.5 inches off of each one of those pieces. In total, I cut 13 of these support pieces. For the placement of these, I marked directly across from one another on the diameter of my circle in 2 different directions, making sure they were evenly spaced, and then I came in between each of those marks and made 2 more marks also spaced evenly apart, making the 12 outside supports about 8½ inches apart all the way around. I then laid them out on those markers and marked the edges so I knew where the width of those were to screw into later. I applied a bead of wood glue and stuck those down all the way around in those same places, saving my final 13th support for right in the center. With them glued down to the bottom circle, I then applied a bead of wood glue to the top of each of the supports, and then came in and laid my second circle on top of that before using my 3-foot clamps to hold it all together. Working my way around the circle, I drilled 2 pilot holes, and then I came in with a countersink bit so that my nails wouldn't stick up above this board and poke you in the butt through the foam. I then drilled in my number 8 2-inch screws. Now the reason I did 2 screws instead of just 1 was so that the support wouldn't twist on just 1 screw. The glue would eventually hold it in place, but until the glue cured, we needed 2 screws to really hold it in place. With all of that screwed in on the first side, I could then flip this over to do the other side. And yes, this was very awkward and very difficult and took me much longer than the few seconds that you're seeing me do this in. I then repeated the same process with the pilot holes, the countersink bit, and the 2-inch nails all the way around this second side, not forgetting that very center support. Our frame is done, and now before we put on the foam and the fabric, I just have to give a little bit of support, like do something a little bit rigid along the outside edges. That way, 1, the foam has something to stick to, and also it does not like cave in if you push on it. But once I have that on, we can go ahead and actually upholster this. Because I needed something rigid but still flexible that could wrap around our circular frame, I picked up this product called Polywall from Lowe's, and I decided to cut along the short edge rather than the long edge to give me smaller pieces that were easier to work with. I started by marking just the height of the frame, which was 12½ inches. I then went in with my tin snips, and these cut this super, super easily. I probably honestly could have used a utility knife or a box cutter, but these did make it super easy. Since I was using multiple pieces, I started my first piece in the middle of one of the 2x4s so that the end of the next piece could share that same support piece. I used JT21 3/8 inch staples to do this, adding about 3 staples on every single one of the support pieces all the way around. When I got close to the end of one piece, I found the last support piece that had overlapped and trimmed it down so that the edge of the poly wall would line up right down the middle of the support. That way, when I came in and added my second piece, I could line it up and it could attach on the other half of that support without the pieces having to overlap. I continued this all the way around the frame. In total, I cut off 3 strips from the short side of the utility panel and used about 2 full ones and about a half of a third, leaving us with a fully constructed interior of our ottoman that we could finally go in and upholster. I have all of this upholstery foam. I have even more than what you can kind of see in the frame here. And I got all of it for $10 at a community yard sale this past spring. So if you've seen it in the back of some of my videos, this is what I've been saving it for, and that's why I have all of that. But I have this tacky spray, the spray adhesive. I'm gonna spray all over it. I was trying to do some research to see if this would like dissolve the foam. Because I know like spray paint and some like spray adhesives can dissolve foam or styrofoam or things like that, and I didn't really get a clear answer, so I'm gonna hope that it does not. And then to cut it, I have this serrated bread knife from my kitchen. I'm gonna hope this works okay. I think it should work fine. If not, I'm gonna have to figure out how to cut this because I don't know how else I would do that. Maybe a box cutter, but we'll see how this guy works out for me. For the foam around the outside of the ottoman, I basically repeated the same process that I did on the poly wall, marking 12.5 inches up from the edge and then going through and cutting it. The bread knife from my kitchen did work very well, thankfully. And I was able to use one long side of this foam and then one short side and wrap the whole ottoman in just those 2 pieces. To attach the foam to the poly wall, I used the adhesive spray like I said, lining up the non-cut straight edge of the foam with the top of the ottoman, and just worked my way around, spraying a small section, sticking the foam to it, rolling it over, and just repeating that process all the way around. For the top foam piece, I laid the ottoman top down on the remaining foam and traced a circle and then used the same bread knife to cut that out. And I ended up doing 2 layers of foam on the top. However, I didn't have enough to do 2 full continuous circles, so my bottom layer was more of a jigsawed piece from the remaining foam, and then I laid my full circle on top, making sure to generously apply the spray adhesive between each layer of foam. All right, this currently looks a little scary because I was using that bread knife, which did work well. It just gave us a very like uneven edge as far as the spray foam goes. It didn't melt the foam like I was hoping it wouldn't, so that's good. It just is not sticking super well, but that's okay. I'm gonna wrap it in batting and that'll help hold it in there. Also, with all of these like ragged edges, the batting's gonna help smooth that out. So not a big deal, thankfully. I did have to use 2 layers of foam for the top of this. Typically for like an upholstered ottoman or something, you want 4 inches of like dense foam. This foam is not very dense. It has a more dense layer along the top, but the yellow part of it is not very dense, but the green layer is more of a denser foam, but it's only like 1 3/4 inches. So I did double it up. I can have like a tiered cake effect going on, just to help give us some more cushion to make this more comfortable. Like I said, this foam was $10. Not all of the foam that I got was $10 at a yard sale. So I mean, we're kind of at the mercy of what I had. It is thick, it is comfortable, not ideal, but it's gonna work just fine. If this was going in like an everyday use, like living room, high traffic area, I would have went out and bought some more foam. But since this is going in a home library, it's an occasional space, I just, for budget reasons, stuck with what I had on hand. For the batting, I used a full-size piece of batting that you would use to create a twin-size quilt. I covered the foam in spray adhesive and then laid the ottoman down on top of the batting. And then working around in opposite directions, I used the spray adhesive, pulled up one side, stapled it to the top, moved to the other side, repeated that process, and then did the same thing in the perpendicular direction from the first one. This was to make sure I got good even tension on the batting so there were no wrinkles or lumps, and then I just worked my way in a circle around the edge. To further avoid seams and bumps, I had 4 sections of about 6 to 8 inches of batting left over. So to try to eliminate any seams, I made a diagonal cut all the way down the batting in one direction, used spray adhesive, pulled that taut, and stapled it down. I did the same thing on the opposite diagonal, and then came in with the remaining piece of batting and pulled that taut up the sides to hide the crossed over seams of the batting. I repeated this same process on all 4 pieces around the edge that I left like this, making sure that once it was all stapled down, I kind of pulled out the batting like you would stretch out a cotton ball along the edge and smoothed it down to avoid having any obvious ridges once the fabric was applied. I then cut off all of the excess and decided to do a second layer of batting to further hide any irregular texture from the cut edges of the foam and help make this ottoman super plush. When I got to the part where I crisscrossed the batting and did the flap over the top, I just made sure to do it in between where I did it on the first layer of batting to further avoid any lumps under the fabric. Now that I have spent an hour refiguring out how to use my sewing machine and reteaching myself how to sew, it is time to make the cover for this ottoman. If you watched the one vlog that I made that was like 15 minutes long, crazy amount long, where I took you along with me to go fabric shopping and antique shopping, and I was doing like a Target run, I found this fabric here. It is a beautiful like brownish green taupey beige tweed fabric with kind of like a chevron pattern running through it with the way that the fabric is running. We wanted something subtly green. I had initially picked one out at a local upholsterer, and the name of that one was called Caper. I really liked it, but it was a little expensive, and it was also very green, with the shelves in the bookcase being a reddish brown, but more on the red side. I wanted to incorporate some green. Red's complementary color, and we're bringing the outdoor palette inside, but I didn't want it to be like Christmas. So I wanted a subtly green situation, and this was perfect. It's just got a light green hue. It's gonna sit on top of our rug that has a light green hue, but like it's very like mossy browns and taupes as well. So this is gonna be great. And then I picked a thread that's very much like the taupey brown, beige colors that are in this with just like a green undertone. So if the thread does show through for any reason, you won't see it. I tried it out on this scrap fabric and you can barely see where that thread is. The way I'm kind of piecing this together, I followed a video of someone using like a stretchy leather fabric. I'll insert it. It was very helpful on how I'm going to construct and sew this together. So I'll insert that for you in case you ever want to sew a circle, because I had no idea how to do that. I started by laying my fabric over the top of my ottoman and giving myself a couple of inches overhang on each side to later cut out my circle with seam allowance. I then laid the remainder of the fabric down and used pins to mark the height of my ottoman, plus about 4 inches to give enough room to wrap over the bottom. I then cut right above those pins, laid down that first piece on top of the remaining fabric, and cut along that same line. Don't worry, I did go and make these edges more precise and an actual measurement later on. And then that remaining third piece of fabric was the same width as the other two, which was awesome because I ended up needing it to be able to wrap all the way around the exterior of the ottoman. Where I was gonna have a seam, I laid my two pieces good side together, making sure that as I pinned, I was lining up the chevron pieces on the two pieces of fabric together. And then once it was all pinned, I came in and marked down the line where I wanted to sew. I used a straight stitch to sew these together, making sure to sew right along that line that I just marked, so that way when I opened up the fabric, the pattern was mirrored as close as possible across that seam for a continuous look. For the fabric on the top of my ottoman, I made a circular template just out of paper, and I made this template an inch wider than the actual diameter of the top of my ottoman. That way I had a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. I pinned the template directly to my fabric all the way around using several pins and smoothing out both the paper and the fabric as I went. And then I just cut all the way around that paper, leaving me with a circular piece of fabric for the top of my ottoman. Just like for the seams along the side, I used a straight stitch to sew this, but I moved very slowly as I did this, making sure to readjust and realign my fabric as I moved my way around the circle. And then as I sewed over any of my vertical seams, I made sure to butterfly that seam open as I sewed it, just like this here, so we make sure it lays flat under the fabric when we put it over the ottoman. Now this is where I would watch the video that I linked in my description because I think he explains it better than I'm about to, but I sewed all the way around until I was about 6 to 8 inches away from my starting point, which you can see here. And then without pinning or sewing, I just lined up where the two ends were gonna meet on the circle, and I made sure to mark both of them in that place where they were gonna meet. Then I laid my fabric out and made a line straight down, finding a reference point in the fabric and making sure I was using the pattern of the fabric to do this. And then I traced a second line 1/2 inch beside that so I knew where to trim off the excess fabric before bringing it back to the sewing machine and sewing those two edges together with a straight stitch, leaving a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then going back to my circle and finishing sewing out that last 6 to 8 inches that I left. Again, butterflying that seam open. Okay, this is the moment of truth. This better fit or I will cry. So let's hope that this works, but we're about to find out. As I put this on, I made sure to work in sections, making sure that those seams were butterflied open and I was smoothing them down as I went so you couldn't feel them underneath the fabric. And luckily this fit great. However, you can see along that circular seam, the seam allowance under there is kind of rolling one way in some places and a different way in other places, causing that seam to look kind of uneven. So I did decide to go back in and sew that seam allowance down the horizontal piece of fabric. This way it was all going in the same direction, leaving that seam looking nice and neat. And because of the thread that I selected, you couldn't even see this stitch on top of the fabric anyway. But with that done, I could put this fabric back on and finally staple it into the bottom. I did this just like I did the batting, working in two perpendicular directions to create some good tension for a smooth, wrinkleless result on the top of the fabric. And then I worked my way around in small sections, creating small pleats every 3 to 4 staples. Now, I'm not gonna lie and say that this is the best way to do this part because I honestly had to take these staples out like 3 or 4 different times, and still I was not completely happy at the end of it. And this thing is finally finished. Now, this is not the room it's eventually going in. This is an upcoming space that you'll see me make over in my own house that's in the works. Like, obviously, I don't even have baseboards over there. So like, this is not its final destination, but I couldn't show you it in the room that it's going in without spoiling an upcoming video for you. I will set a scene and paint a picture for you of how it could look styled in this space for you here in just a sec. But first, I wanted to point out along the bottom, it's kind of, the way I stapled it along the bottom, it's not like awful, but there's some wrinkling and some weird pleats that aren't like super even. So I'm not super happy with the way that I stapled the bottom, but I really couldn't figure out a great way to do that. And because 2 pieces of fabric were not long enough to wrap around the entire circumference of the ottoman, I had to do 3 pieces of fabric. So I tried to space them evenly, which came out to like 41 inches or something like that. But you see this seam here, there's a seam right here, and then a seam right here. They're all roughly evenly spaced around the exterior. And then one last detail for this ottoman that we were going to add were some feet. I was gonna add these little bun feet and stain them in like a dark kind of cherry-ish wood color to tie that reddish brown color into this piece. And I was gonna do 4 around the bottom of this guy. However, I trimmed the support pieces on the inside frame down 1.5 inches because I forgot to account for my foam on top. Well, then I decided to do a second layer of foam on top, which I then did not account for and could not go in and trim those pieces when I decided to do that. So that raised the height of this to now be the same level as the chairs in that room. Ergonomically, if you're sitting in a chair and reclining your feet on an ottoman, you want the ottoman to be the same height or lower than the chair. You don't want your feet to be higher than your hips. And this would raise this ottoman up 2 inches, and it'd be 2 inches higher than the chair. I've talked with the client about that, and we haven't made the final decision on that yet, but if you come back for that final reveal video, we will have made that decision by then, and you can see whether or not we decided to add these feet or not. But for now, I'm just gonna leave them off. Now, to paint a little bit of a picture for you of how I would style it in this space, because honestly, I would love to keep this thing. It's gonna be hard to give it up. If I bring in a smaller version of the actual rug that is in the room, you can see how well this ottoman is pulling out some of the colors from that rug. I have this pillow cover made out of a Killam rug that I got off of Etsy. And then I have a couple of samples of boucle fabric in 2 different colors that I could reupholster these chairs in and then stain the arms a darker color. And then on top of the ottoman, I could style it with a book or 2 and then bring in a crock like this beautiful antique brownish green one. And those would all kind of work together in my house, paired with the color on my fireplace mantle and travertine surround and some dark wood cabinetry I have planned to add along that back wall to create a really beautiful, natural, earthy palette that's very texturally interesting. Now, is it perfect compositionally in this space? No, but I would still love to keep it. The client was over for dinner the other night and asked if she could take it home with her, and I said, absolutely not. I have to show you guys. So I wanted to show you how I would represent it in my space, and then you'll get to see it potentially with those feet on it in a couple videos in the actual space that it's going to be going in. This piece and then some Roman shades are the last pieces that have to go in that room before it's done, and I can show it to you. But I hope you like this video. I hope you can kind of see a little bit of a vision here, and I hope you'll consider subscribing and coming back for when I actually get to put this in that project and reveal that full room to you. I hope this was helpful if you go to accomplish a similar project on your own, and if you ever have any questions, please just leave those in the comments below and I would be happy to answer them for you. Until next time, I am wishing you all my best. Yes, hello. Oh my goodness, what? Okay, look at you. So you camera ready, huh? You're camera ready. We're all camera ready. I love it. Okay.